Hello, and thank you for tuning in to Lady Lord, my podcast in which I share the best horror and gothic stuff out there. Today, we are talking about some of the soundtracks that I love, and we're going to analyze those and see if we can pick out anything from the soundtrack that kind of gives us an insight into what the movie may share. Obviously, I've already seen these movies and I've heard these songs, but I thought it'd be really cool to talk through them. Obviously, it'd be kind of boring if I did this by myself, so I brought my partner with me today. Thomas, how are you doing?
I'm pretty good.
That's awesome. Thomas, like me, is a musical nerd, isn't that right?
Yes, indeed.
So we're both in school for musical things. I'm in school for music business, and Thomas?
Audio production.
Awesome. But obviously, I am kind of a horror geek. Thomas is not.
Can't stand it.
So I have brought him along with me to get maybe a second opinion. I think that's always super interesting to have. So I have 3 movies. He's seen 2 of them with me and 1 of them without, which is fine. We'll still have some interesting things to say. I also wanted to keep it a little interesting, and we could pick our own horror or gothic, whichever one, a soundtrack from a movie that either of us enjoy, and we'll talk about that. And then just for a fun activity, I wanted us to grab 2 songs that we would think would fit into our dream type of horror or gothic movie. Doesn't matter the song, whatever we want. So I figured we could start and talk about Night of the Living Dead, directed by George A. Romero. I do have show notes that include the soundtrack and some information about these. And I have, for both of us, printed soundtracks so we can look at them. So if we look at this first soundtrack, we can obviously, from listening, we know that it's orchestral, which I think it's pretty normal for that time, right?
Yes.
I feel like it'd be more interesting if we could bring in some like radio hits into movies from the 60s and 70s, but I know that's just not the norm. So what I found interesting in the soundtrack is that the soundtrack literally tells us the entire plot of the movie. It starts out by like driving up to the cemetery, and then you can literally go about it and see that it says like radio, radio emergency.
First radio report.
Yeah, radio report. And then there's one that literally says Helen's death. So it gives away major plot points, and we can tell that there's something coming after these people. We just can't tell that it's like zombie people, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I found interesting. I also wanted to ask about your opinion because I thought, I don't know if they did this if they did this back in the day, but do you know if they also still did like putting soundtracks on shellac or vinyl?
Yes, that I think they would have done that back then. Would have been making a separate soundtrack,
right? Because that's why I think those are so interesting. I also know that sometimes scores can be very similar because they have to like transition well together. So I know that's probably why they had to name them so specifically. But I kind of like the idea of like we had to name them so they could go on the soundtrack vinyl, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So I thought that was pretty interesting.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Are you ready to move on to the next one?
Sure.
This one is a more modern movie. It is What We Do in the Shadows, directed by Taika Waititi and Jermaine Clement. I also forgot to mention Night of the Living Dead. The composers were William Luce and a Russian artist that I don't know how to pronounce, but I will include that in the show notes as well, which I thought was really interesting. Anyway, back to What We Do in the Shadows. I think this one gives away some funny tropes, because we know What We Do in the Shadows is about these unconventional vampire roommates, right?
Mm-hmm.
But they're still very much vampires. There are literally, like, there's songs about, like, the werewolf and, like, You're Dead and Reflections Scatter, which is, like, to me, really funny.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's like, you can't see yourself as a vampire.
Mm-hmm.
We don't like werewolves as vampires. And I think there are a lot of, like, electro, like, EDM songs in this soundtrack because they like to go party.
Yeah, definitely.
But a song that I, like, really loved in this one, it's called 9 by Black Ox Orchestra, which I didn't know I'd love this song that much, but it's literally just an acoustic song, but they're kind of plucking in a very minor tune, and it's kind of really romantic, and it sounds kind of Spanish as well, but I can tell that it's supposed to be really gothic and kind of like meant to be like a romantic era type of thing. I think it's really, really beautiful, and I think it could be literally the center of a story of some gothic novel. It makes me think of like an estate or like a haunted castle or like something beautiful like that. So
Is that the song from the story plot where his girlfriend of like hundreds of years or like a few years, is it that song?
I think so.
I think so too.
So
That makes sense.
it's very emotional, even though there aren't any words. It's very pretty, and it's literally just a guitar,
Mm-hmm.
but it's beautiful. Absolutely. There are other songs like this that really set the tone, but also I think it's like kind of genius with modern soundtracks, especially with Taika Waititi. We know he's like an eclectic person,
Mm-hmm.
so I know it was probably fun for him to be like, oh, we should put this song in this song, because he's so funny, and I feel like he definitely included some more funny songs.
Oh, definitely.
Mm-hmm. So, you ready for the next one as well?
Yes.
All right. So, this one I found probably the most interesting. This is Get Out by Jordan Peele. It's so interesting because this one, Jordan Peele hired, I think, yes, 2 composers.
Mm-hmm.
So there's Michael Abel, yes.
Abels.
And Abels?
Yeah.
There we go. And Timothy Williams.
Okay.
It's absolutely crazy because I read this article on crackmagazine.net, excuse me. And Peele firstly started with Abel, and Abel has some recognition, but he really didn't have anything huge until Get Out. And Peele really wanted somebody to help bring the story itself to life, even though it's a super enticing story and it's super scary already. He wanted somebody to make it just pop, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So he just wanted to make it way more haunting. And Abel says that obviously he's a person of color, so he stated that even though Get Out is of the extreme and it is fictional, he can still relate to being the darkest person in the room many, many times.
Mm-hmm.
And he wanted to make sure the music personified Chris's point of view, the main character, Chris, especially during awkward moments like that. And I think that's like one of the creepiest things because he had to put himself in Chris's headspace,
Mm-hmm.
which is absolutely crazy to me.
Yeah.
So, the song that really resonated with me was The Sunken Place, because you were with me with that
Mm-hmm.
when we were watching the whole movie, but that scene, it just felt so existential and it felt so scary. What do you think about that?
Yeah, it was definitely um, weird and like definitely existential, and I think the music helps reflect that because it creates an ambience of like not even an ambience, an ambiance of nothingness, which is
Mm-hmm.
what the sunken place technically is.
Mm-hmm.
So
I completely agree. There are like some points in the song where it sounds like just dropping. Just kind of like that feeling when you're like falling asleep almost, but you're not entirely asleep. So you just kind of bounce back awake. It literally has that same feeling, but illustrated with music, which I think is insane. And I absolutely loved that. And the whole soundtrack itself, it's genre bending because Peele wanted Abel to do many genres, especially blues. He wanted him to make terrifying music based on different genres, and he really did that. So I think that's so amazing. And I just love how existential the music is, even though it's orchestral. And I think that was a good choice on Peele's part to make it orchestral. What do you think?
oh, definitely, because I think if there would have been lyrics within the music or anything that was too carrying, it would have took away from like the dialogue of certain scenes, especially when they're like there's specific one scene when Chris's character is talking to the white families that are visiting for
Mm-hmm.
the special day, and it's like, oh, black's really in style right now, which
Mm,
is like, which is the joke, which is what the whole movie's about.
yeah.
So,
Oh, absolutely insane. And if we look through the soundtrack, it also, like Night of the Living Dead, shows us the entire plot. But this one's not as um like telling. It's not as spoilery. So we have stuff like Chris and Rose, the deer. We have Ice-T, Georgina at the window. Hypnosis, which that gives a little bit away. The auction, which is absolutely crazy.
yeah, that's the special day, is the auction day.
Mm-hmm, right. The sunken place, which we talked about. Rod's Bing search. Um, Teacup TV. Wow, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then there's another song literally called "Go Get 'Em, Grandpa," and it makes me laugh so bad because like that's an awful scene and it's terrifying, but just the way that they're so casually just naming these songs just makes my heart giggle.
Oh, definitely.
So the thing that I am most excited for is that we're picking out our own songs. But before we do that, we are also picking out one of our favorite soundtracks from any horror or gothic song that we like. So, can you tell me about the movie that you chose and why you considered it gothic or horror?
So for the movie, I picked "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou," which is like, for those who don't know, it's a parodied take on the story of the Odyssey,
Mm-hmm.
written by Homer from
Mm-hmm.
way back when. But it's set in the time period of uh, Southern America in the 1930s. So it's post World War II, but not World War II, post World War One, and roughly during the Great Depression.
Mm-hmm.
But the music of that time is really depressing
Mm-hmm.
because and that's what the whole story is about, is like one man's bad luck almost the entirety of the time, and just can't get back on his feet, even though he may be the good guy in the story, but he's like a piece of shit at the same
Mm-hmm.
time. So it's very entertaining to watch. And then if you listen to the contrast of the music that helps that, then it kind of fills in more gaps, like the Siren song, the song of "O Death," which is an old Southern hymnal sung by Ralph Stanley, who was a musician during the 30s in that early era of Southern bluegrass. but like he's now like 70 when this movie, or like 70 to 80 when this movie's made, and it's him doing an entirely a cappella song. So it's very haunting, especially in the scene where it happens, because it happens during a KKK rally, but like that's part of the plot. They're not racist. Well, the KKK is, but the movie's not racist. It's just like one of the tribulations of what's the character? I can't remember the George Clooney's character's name, but it's his tribulation of trying to get back to his home and his wife and his kids. It's just one of the many steps to get through there.
Right. So, definitely the soundtrack is alluding to the tropes inside of the movie being a Southern Gothic.
Yeah, I think of it as a Southern Gothic. I know probably the guys that made it would probably disagree, but I think it is, and it's, I don't know, Southern Gothic's very interesting because it's like not Gothic at all until you look at certain elements and you're like, oh, that is
Right.
fully Gothic.
Especially because of the music.
Yeah, and the music is like can be very Gothic at
Right.
times.
What's that lyric? Was that the "Oh Death"?
Yeah.
Can you explain those lyrics maybe a
So
little more?
the song "Oh Death" is about, the song itself is about a man dying on his bed, and he's essentially praying for either death to take him away as quick as possible, or for someone else to pray for him to take death as possible, like because he's in so much pain. Because and he also doesn't want to die at the same time. So
Right.
it's a lot of conflicting. Like one of the lyrics is, "Oh death, won't you pray that someone, or that you'll come back another day?" Because like he doesn't want to die, but he's
Right.
also in pain. So it's a real conflict. So
That's the thing with Southern Gothics, because emotionally, when you think about it, they can get super dark. But usually the visual, like the movie itself, is not that dark, and the attitude is kind of light. So I think the meshing of those two really makes the subgenre that Southern Gothic is. I think it's also beautiful. And surprisingly enough, my soundtrack that I chose to talk about too is also a Southern Gothic. It's Devil All the Time, directed by Antonio Campos. And I also think this soundtrack is beautiful. There's a couple orchestral songs that introduce locations, like Knock'em Stiff, Ohio, which is some part of the plot and where it takes place. But I really like how the soundtrack, unlike Night of the Living Dead, involves popular songs from that point in time in that decade. Like Honeycomb by Jimmy Rogers. That's like definitely what Southern people would be listening to on the radio while they're doing yard work or driving or doing something like that. And I think the songs inside of the movie involve a lot of talk about religion, which I think is a huge theme in Southern Gothics, because in this movie, I think religion is the biggest enemy, and it makes the story so much darker when you think about everything that's happened to the main character, because all in all, he's alone.
yeah.
He's pretty much alone. Tragedy has struck him all his entire life. He's mostly unlucky.
Yeah.
And then religion fails him. And I think with all of these things failing and him trying to get revenge for the people he's lost and maybe avenging those people by trying to understand what other people have done, especially with religion, it just makes for a very complex and beautiful movie. Especially with that music. I think that helps tie it in. And I also like that some modern artists were definitely hired for songwriting in Devil All the Time, because they have another kind of hymnal song that's talking about, like, are you washed in the blood of the Lamb, and talking about, like, sins being cured and everything like that. It's just like a church hymn.
Yeah.
But it's definitely made by modern songwriters, which I think is very, very cool.
Mm-hmm.
So that's mine. Did you come up with 2 songs that you'd like to talk about that would be in your horror movie of choice?
Yeah. So if I was making, well, it depends on the horror movie.
Mm-hmm.
So the first song I picked, because I went stereotypical horror movie, I think it's Sea Rice by Ghosts. So the name of the song is hard to pronounce because it's a French band, but specifically it's a French satanic metal band.
Ooh.
So it's very entertaining, especially coming from, we're just talking about Southern Gothic now. We're in,
Yeah.
talking about them. So I think if you're doing the stereotypical horror movie, this song is definitely, I would think, a key attribute because it's very dark, very minor-esque, especially in like the actual chord progression and like the melody. It's very just dark and ambient. So it's just meant to like make hair stand on the back of your neck if I was trying to sum up the song.
Right.
So yeah, that's the first one. And then the second one is if it hadn't been for love by the Steel Drivers, which, if you don't know who the Steel Drivers is, it's essentially Chris Stapleton's band when he first came to Nashville, and he was doing bluegrass music before he did country music.
Nice.
This song specifically is written by him, and it's about a man who murdered his wife, which is hilarious because it's a very upbeat song when you listen to it. It's very major, very happy. But when you break down the lyrics, it's like one of them is 4 cold walls holding me against my will. At least I know she'll be lying still.
Ooh.
So it's like, I'm in prison, but that bitch dead.
That's rough.
So I don't care. But he's like, he doesn't want to be in prison, but he doesn't feel bad for murdering his wife. So if, like, in a movie like The Devil All the Time, which is very Southern Gothic-esque, and it's about murder, essentially, and multiple murders and tragic things that happen to one character. Like, if this song was on the car radio at the time, let's say they're through one of the driving scenes, it would make perfect sense because it's very dark, but it sounds happy, and it's also very Southern bluegrass-esque.
I will tell you, one of my favorite style of music and songs itself are the happy composition, sad, or destructive lyric.
Shit, there's a whole genre about it in the 20s. It's like tragedy songs. Like, there's multiple songs about, like, train crashes.
That's awful.
And shit like that. It's just, like, terrible things that have happened, but they're, like, they sound happy, but they're, like, terrible.
I don't know, the structure of those kind of songs always come out good for some reason.
No.
I really like to listen to them, because if you are having one of those days where you just don't analyze your music and you're just listening, it can make you feel happy. So,
yeah.
Just like If It Hadn't Been for Love, I really bopped my head to that song.
Oh, it's a good song.
I swear.
Great songwriting.
Alrighty. So for my songs, for one of them, I went for a pretty, like, meme type of route. It's just like, you'd hear the song and be like, oh, okay. So that song is Boogeyman by Childish Gambino. It's already a killer song. It's from the album Awaken My Love, which is definitely like R&B, soul, super cool. And it describes that of a literal boogeyman. Like a man with a gun, scaring children, how people fear him regardless. And he's coming for you, you know? But if we break this song down societally, we know that the song is about discrimination from police onto people of color. And I know that kind of brings it down a little bit, but the song, if you listen to it, Gambino is literally making siren noises with his mouth. You'll hear this like kind of crescendo thing that's like boop, 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 boop. And he like makes this kind of like siren, and there's this menacing like laugh in it, which I think can also just be like horror and a story itself, but I think if we look at it societally, it is about that.
Mm-hmm.
But the song itself, I know, is put out there for just pure enjoyment. So I would think of that as my slashing song. Like a slasher coming through, and it's his like villain story arc where he's just slashing through people, and we're finally getting to really understand the slasher, and all you hear is boogeyman. And I just think it's really cool. I think that's smart. And it's a good song to listen to. It shouldn't be one that you want to dance to, but I dance to it. I do. And my next song would be Man with an Axe by Lorde. It's a newer song off of Solar Power, and I think this song would be my final girl or person song, however you identify, which is like the Still Driver song. It's kind of like that of a love song, except this one literally is a love song.
Mm-hmm.
And it's talking about how another person could literally take them down because there's so much love. Like, you're better than me because you have so much love, and I love you so much, and you're just the star, you know?
Yep.
So that's literally the whole idea of the song, but it's out of her control, and it's a lot all at once, this big overwhelming emotion, and it just sounds like something, like a type of song that would roll during the end of the movie, going into the credits. And the song is really powerful, and it is talking about love, but it's also like a melancholy type of minor song. And it sounds like it could be from the 60s. And I really like it. And I think it would fit kind of like unconventionally. I also think Jade from My Heart is a Chainsaw would really relate to this song. I know it's literally like talking about having an axe, and I don't mean that like literally because but I think if My Heart was a Chainsaw was a movie and the end scene was her walking over the dam, seeing the whole mass destruction, carrying her little machete or axe or whatever, and then Man with an Axe by Lorde just starts playing and the credits roll, I think that would be sick. Because I remember telling you about the ending of the movie.
Yeah.
And sorry. I already put it into movie brain, into a visual, but I told you about the end of that book and how
you did.
fucking weird it was. But that's okay. I really see your songs definitely being in like an 80s slasher. Definitely. Yeah. So I really like those ideas. And I'm glad that I could have another opinion to help me analyze this music and have some fun with it, because I know we're both music nerds, and I know you'd be down to talk about music anyway.
Yeah.
So I thank you so much for coming on.
Oh, thank you.
And I had a great time.
Oh, that's good.
How about you?
I had a good time.
That's great. Well, thank you for listening. I am Lady Lore, and we will see you in our next one. Bye.